All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College EWD 1000 Web Development Technologies class, I'm creating a series of video presentations based on the Mozilla Developer Network Learn Web Development series. I'm in the CSS portion and the building blocks section or module, and right now I'm looking at values and units. We're about halfway through here, and it's time to come in and start talking about color. And as you can see, as it mentions there's many different ways to specify color in CSS. Some of them are going to work better than others are. The standard color system as mentioned there is 24-bit, and that will allow you to display between 16 and 17 million distinct colors. All right. So it says, let's take a look at some of the ways that colors can be displayed. Now, some of this I've already mentioned to you earlier, but it doesn't hurt to go over it again anyway. There are color keywords, as it says right there. And you've already seen some of this. So if I jump back for a second into, wow, how did I lose my, Visual Studio Code. There we go. Okay, so when you've looked at, when I've given you some of the examples that are in here, okay, so if we say color red, kind of nice thing about Visual Studio Code because you can see what it does there. But if I change this and I just come in and I type in color, all right, now notice, well, right now it's not really showing me much of anything, but what it had showed me before, let's see if I can bring that back. There we go. So these are the built-in colors. So I can change, grab any of these. These are the ones for which there are already things set. In other words, okay, now I just used red before. You already saw that. All right, and notice as soon as I type in RE, how it's starting to cut down the list. All right. And it also shows you a little bit of what it's going to look like, which is very nice, in my opinion. All right, but the point is it's using built-in color words. All right, that's what they're talking about here. Hexadecimal, we've already talked about. Now, the hexadecimal number system, if you tell a human being to count to 10, they will say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Kind of an old programmer joke is if you tell a programmer to count to 10, they will say 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All right, and if you are using hexadecimal, which rather than the decimal number system that we use, base 10, it is base 16. So it goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then A, B, C, D, E, F. So actually 1, 0 in hex means 116 and 0 ones. So really it's the number 16. The reason that that's important is one way that you can show any of those 16.7 million colors is by using their hexadecimal red, green, blue values. You start it with a hashtag and you put afterwards typically 6 digits. Depending on how the pattern is set up, you might be able to do it with just 3. But the point is the first 2 digits represent from 0 to 255, which is FF. So from 00 to FF represent the amount of red. The second 2 from 00 to FF is the amount of green. The third 2 from 00 to FF is the amount of blue. So here's a couple of examples. So again, just to show you this, if I let's grab this one because it's the most colorful one. So if I were to go back into here and I were to replace the word red with that, okay, you can immediately see the change. All right, and it's showing that to you. In fact, when it brings up a color wheel like this, if if you can play with a color wheel, you can basically choose anything in here you want. So I could choose that. You can see how it changes. Change that back to red again. All right, not only are there hex codes, but as mentioned before, there's RGB, which is red, green, blue. Now, when you use RGB, unlike when you use hex codes, the hex codes are 00 to FF for red, 00 to FF for green, 00 to FF for blue. When you use RGB, it's 0 to 255 red, 0 to 255 green, 0 to 255 blue. The 0 means total absence. The FF, or the 255, means total presence. So, as it says, an RGB value is a function. It's a function of red, green, blue, RGB. And it says it is given 3 parameters to represent the red, the green, and the blue. The difference, as it says right there, is it's not represented by the 2 hex digits that we talked about before. Rather, it's a decimal number between 0 and 255. Now, notice there's also an A there, and again, that's for alpha, and that's as talking about opacity. So when you work with these Rgba colors, as it says, these work exactly the same way as RGB, except on the end, you put a 4th value. That 4th value is between 0 and 1. If you want a color to be fully transparent, you use 0. If you want a value to be fully opaque, you use 1. And if you want it to be something in between there, you use a decimal between 0.1 typically and 0.9. So here's some examples. All right, you can see the difference. For instance, the 0.9, basically there's almost, it's almost opaque. You can see very little through there, where you can see more through here and more through here because of the numbers that were used there. All right. Now, as mentioned here, it says at some point, modern browsers were updated. So RGBA and RGB, HSL, HSLA, etc. became pure aliases for one another and started to behave exactly the same. So it says, which one should you use? And it says it's up to you. And really, it should be the one that you are the most comfortable with. My advice is try them all and see which one makes the most sense to you. All right, again, the HSL, the H stands for hue, the S for saturation, and the L for light. As you can see in there, hue is the base shade of the color. Now notice it's different. It takes a value between 0 and 360 because it's working off of a color wheel. All right. S for saturation, how saturated is the color? That takes a percentage. Where 0 is no color, as it says, it'll appear as a shade of gray because it's an absence, and 100 is a complete saturation. Finally, you've got lightness, the L. So as it says, how light or bright is the color? It takes a value between 0 and 100%. When 0 is no light, meaning it appears completely black, and 100% is the number representing full light or full saturation, so it's completely white. All right, so they've changed these examples here, same ones as before, but these are using HSL. I will tell you that what I have found over time is this is one that's probably used the least, just because it's fairly simplistic to go from the regular color names to RGB and even to hex codes or hex codes to RGB. But the HSL, it's not that it's hard, but it takes some getting used to. And like I said, what I have found is people tend to use this one the least. All right, images, as we're working our way through this section, as it says, the image value is used whenever an image has a valid value. It can be an actual image pointed to via a URL, or it can be some kind of a gradient. So this would be an example of an image. There's an example of a gradient. All right. Notice when you use the image for a background image, again, we talked about this in a much earlier lesson. This right there that you see in blue is the syntax. So in other words, you say background hyphen image colon and then URL. And if if you have to. So if this URL happens to be inside of an images folder, it would be images/URL. All right, and the gradient basically is how do you want it to appear. All right, the percentages, the color that you want to start with, the color you want to go to, etc. All right, and again, I always forget how to use gradients. So I typically, with me, I'll go back and I'll do something like this. I'll go back and I'll say W3 schools, HTML, it might not even be in the HTML one, but we'll see, tutorial gradient. And it might be under the CSS instead, I don't know. CSS gradients, okay. And there you go. And this is what I typically go back to if I do want to use a gradient. Why? Because there's all sorts of examples in here. All right, and notice here, notice to bottom, right, red, yellow. All right. Well, and you can see the yellow. So you come in here and what do? Well, what if I change this? All right, it's got to bottom, right, red, yellow. What if I change this to green and blue and I click run? Well, you can immediately see the change. So this is a fantastic way for you to learn how to work with this stuff, in my opinion. All right. Now, it's kind of interesting that they're putting this position thing. Well, they're giving it very little. Okay, let's see what this is. It says the position value represents a set of 2D coordinates used to position an item as a background image, and it can take words like top, left, bottom, right, and center. All right, and typically it consists of two values, as it says. The first positions it horizontally, the second vertically. Remember, 0, 0, or really here 0, 0 is the origin there. So the number that you put for horizontal is how much to the right or left you want it to go. And the number that you put for vertical is the amount down or up that you want to go. All right. So here, as you can see, they have used what? There's a box. The box is 300 pixels wide. So that's the 300. 400 pixels tall. So that's the 400. There's this image is the star. No repeat says put it in once. And the background position, right 40 pixels, is basically telling it where to position itself. Now you might look at it and go, right 40 pixels? Yeah, that's how much from this right-hand side you want it to move over. All right. And again, you'll see some of this stuff later as we go on as well. All right, throughout the examples above, it says we've seen places where keywords are used as a value. We've used words like red and black, etc. These keywords more accurately are described as identifiers. In other words, they're a value that's understood by CSS. That's why they're not put in quotes. It says there are places where you use strings in CSS. For example, when specifying generated content. In this case, the value does use quotes. All right, so when we look right here, well, now notice content. So you're putting content inside of the box. This is a string. I know because it is quoted in the CSS. And you'll notice that it must be quoted here, but it is not shown with quotes in here. Okay. All right, the final type of value that they're going to look at in this section is known as functions. You've already seen some functions as they mention here. Rgb is a function. HSL is a function. URL is a function. Those are all functions that actually do take a value. All right, either the amount of red, the amount of green, the amount of blue, the amount of hue, the amount of saturation, the amount of light, or a URL. So as mentioned there, a value that behaves more like something you might find in traditional programming is the calc function. We actually did look at one of these before. All right, it says it gives you the ability to do simple calculations inside of your CSS. Again, there may be a reason for doing that, and as mentioned here, they're saying it is particularly useful if you want to work out values that you can't define when writing CSS for your project. So at runtime, you need to be able to figure them out. as opposed to you being able to figure them out at compile time, so that when the program actually gets compiled, boom, it's all set. Here, it might be based on the size of your browser, the type of medium you're using. Is it a laptop, a desktop, a phone, a tablet, etc.? So in the example that they have here, it says they're using calc to make a box 20% plus 100 pixels wide. And again, if we look at this, is this going to change? Whoops, try that again. All right. So you'll notice that right here, this is not changing, or has not changed yet. And that's as small as I can make it with this browser. All right. So again, the takeaway from this is, as mentioned, this would be something that you'd want to use if you want to be able to set things at runtime. Have them basically be able to change dynamically as you change your screen size. So there is a test your skills here, values and units. Have a look at that if you get some time, probably be a good idea. So we are now here. Next, we'll be on sizing items in CSS. And in there, we will talk about setting specific sizes, again, using percentages, etc., and some other little goodies. So I'll be back with that in just a couple minutes.